Well, good afternoon, everybody. Today, the government is releasing the findings of the end-to-end review of the managed isolation and quarantine system and the actions we have taken and will further take to strengthen the system. But I need to be very clear from the start. There is no playbook for this kind of pandemic. In April, we had to stand up our isolation and quarantine system overnight, and no system is ever going to be perfect when it involves the contribution of humans and therefore human behaviour and human error in a dangerous and tricky virus. So while we can never guarantee it will be completely fail-safe, the review has certainly found that there is more that we can do to reduce risk. I also want to put our managed isolation and quarantine system in both a global and national context. We are also one of the only countries in the world even attempting to do this. And I think it's really worth noting that. Nearly every other country is only requiring home-based self-isolation with no testing, a system we had here up until April 10th, but which proved unsuitable for stopping the spread of the virus. Our 14-day government-managed isolation with compulsory day 3 and 12 testing is the strictest system anywhere in the world that we are aware of. At no point in our nation's modern history have we ever held in isolation and quarantine facilities the sheer volume of people that we are currently dealing with. The global pandemic is getting worse, not better, and Kiwis are increasingly returning home from international hotspots, and more of them are bringing the virus with them. We currently have capacity to isolate around 6,000 people at any one time in 21 facilities located across Auckland, Rotorua, Christchurch and Wellington. For a sense of scale, we are currently accommodating the equivalent of a small town such as Kirikiri, and the numbers are forecast to rise to over 7,000 in the coming week. It is a system that to date has also worked. So far, over 22,000 people have been through managed isolation and quarantine since April 10, when it became compulsory. In that time, there have been 53 cases in the facilities, or 0.2% of the total numbers through them. And importantly, no cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand have been linked to someone leaving a facility. In short, they have done their job of stopping COVID at the border and protecting the gains that we have collectively won as a nation. But today's review highlights that while the system was manageable under level 4, when there were only small numbers of New Zealanders returning home, it is now a system under stress, with arrivals increasing by 73% last week compared to the beginning of April. The review identified a number of issues, including the following. The current resourcing capacity was not sufficient to carry out forward planning for future demand. There has been insufficient structure and role clarity and a need for a clear chain of authority, which Commodore Webb's appointment seeks to fix. The Ministry of Health clinical policy directives appear to be discretionary at a DHB level. Communications with returnees has been insufficient. There was a lack of written information provided to returnees prior to entry, setting out what they can expect and, importantly, what their responsibilities as someone rejoining the team of 5 million are. The use of PPP on planes and transits and at hotels has been inconsistent, and health check procedures differ across facilities, and day 12 tests needs to be prioritised so that we can get those results in time to move people out over after that 14-day period has finished. All of this is achievable, and in fact, Commodore Webb and I have already made a series of changes in the last 10 days that are already making a difference in addressing some of these issues. For example, earlier this week, we met with the senior management of Auckland Airport and have devised an arrivals process that means returnees on their way out to facilities do not come into contact with anyone else at the international terminal, and that the old Jetstar terminal will now be stood up for domestic transfer flights, so that there will be a full separation from the public. Air Commodore Webb will have more to say about arrangements at airports. In Wellington, those coming off the domestic transfer flight were met airside and put onto buses on the tarmac, again not coming into contact with any member of the public. The additional military staff at the facilities has resulted already in more stringent security arrangements and decreased movements around the hotel. We have also been meeting with local council, iwi, DHBs and other stakeholders in places where we are standing up facilities to ensure each city is ready and prepared for running an isolation facility. And we will also be signing contracts with DHBs that will include a ratio of health staff to returnees that will ensure adequate staffing levels to complete all day 3 and 12 testing, daily health checks and the provision of any other health services required, such as mental health, while returnees are in isolation and quarantine facilities. These service level agreements with DHBs will create an accountability mechanism to ensure services are being provided where and when they should be. And it's now my pleasure to hand over to Air Commodore Webb to set out the actions we'll be taking in response to the review's finding.
Thank you, Minister. As Minister Woods has said, we have a system that has worked well for us. It did what we needed it to do in the immediate emergency response. Nonetheless, it is currently under some strain and it needs to be scaled up to meet future demand. This is all doable. As of today, we have seen 22,832 New Zealanders return home. We have grown capacity to 5,764 beds. 4,692 are occupied across 21 isolation and quarantine facilities in 4 different regions. In 7 days' time, the projected current demand is 5,877, and we have a plan to have 6,584 beds online to meet that demand. To say this has to be a finely tuned operation is an understatement. But we have an operational team that are working incredibly hard to assure that supply meets demand. Minister Woods has identified the issues in the report, and for us these fall under 3 main themes: clear lines of accountability and responsibility, making sure we have adequate resources on the ground to support the operation, and standardised, robust and clearly communicated procedures to all involved. We've said it before, this system relies on those returning New Zealanders to understand and to follow the rules. This is a serious obligation, and we have clear expectations around those individual accountabilities. A number of actions have already been put in place. While this review has been an important part of how we can deliver a robust system, we have not been waiting for it to land before taking action. First, the need for increased resourcing and capacity. As you know, last week I announced a doubling of the on-the-ground Defence Force staff of 32 across 18 facilities. I'm pleased to report that as of today we have 168 NZDF personnel across 21 facilities providing 24/7 coverage. The total number involved across the Defence Force system is 238, and this includes people supporting the planning, the training, assurance and necessary surge capacity. There are also more government staff across the end-to-end system. Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Police, Aviation Security, whānau ora, Health and Fire and Emergency staff all contribute to what is a significant all-of-government response. Nonetheless, demand continues to grow. The system is enormously complex and we will need additional resources to go into planning, health checks, testing and communicating with returnees. And work is underway to do just that. In terms of procedures, a range of activities are underway. For example, Minister Woods mentioned the arrangements we put in place with Auckland Airport to ensure the safe and streamlined transfer of passengers through the terminal on arrival. We are working with Auckland Airport to enhance these arrangements further, utilising a separate international arrival facilities and the utilisation of a remote domestic terminal to transfer returnees to other centres on dedicated charter flights that are of course completely separated from their fellow Kiwis. In a similar vein, on Friday we met with senior managers from Christchurch Airport and we have agreed on further strengthening the separation mechanisms there. These mechanisms are in response to the increasing challenge of operating level 4 protocols when the community is at level 1. The Minister and I have also been talking to airlines about measures we can take to better smooth and manage demand. Regardless of what facility you're in, there should be consistent operational delivery. This will also assist with reporting. Health guidelines are the basis for our operational practice, but I will also be looking at it from an operational setting. The review of PPE is a priority. The audit found there is inconsistent use throughout the whole process. Simplifying and standardising what is a complex environment is crucial. We are working with health to ensure the guidelines are up to date and consistently applied. The government's testing strategy has determined that returnees, border staff, airline staff and those who work in the managed isolation and quarantine system are our greatest risk for picking up the virus. The outbreaks in isolation hotels in Victoria serve as a reminder of the need to ensure all these people are adequately protected. In regards to communication, we are standing up a formal system of communicating with returnees at all points of the process about managed isolation. Pre-departure, when they purchase a ticket, in-flight, on arrival, and then ongoing throughout their 14-day stay. A comprehensive information pack is provided to all returnees. Good information and instructions should help to reduce some of the negative behaviours we are responding to in the facilities. Critically, we have strengthened the exit processes. No one leaves a managed isolation facility without returning a negative COVID test. Ensuring all day 12 tests are taken on day 12 and results prioritised and returned on day 13 means people can depart efficiently on day 14. Most of these actions are already underway. When fully implemented, we will make a good system better and stronger. With more and more New Zealanders seeking to escape COVID overseas, we need to maintain a robust border and managed isolation and quarantine system to prevent community transmission. We can now take questions.
Minister, at the beginning you said that the compassionate exemptions, they wouldn't be considered again until you had the report back and you were satisfied that the system was working. Are you satisfied now and can they go back?
So this is something that Air Commodore Webb and I have discussed frequently about whether or not we do have that level of satisfaction. We do not currently have that level of satisfaction in order to reinstate those exemptions, and I'll pass over to you to go through some of the things that we're looking for before that we can actually return to those.
Yeah, in my mind there are three key parts of that system. One is the decision-making criteria around whether a returnee should be exempted from their 14 days. Up until now, that's primarily health assessment, and it will continue to be driven by health needs. The second part, which I feel as though the changes we're making are required to strengthen, are the transfer or the assurance around the transfer of those people from those facilities to their point where they are requiring to be exempted to. And then the third part is the compliance mechanisms that needs to sit around those additional days beyond the managed isolation facilities. So those two parts are required to be strengthened in order for me to be satisfied that people who ordinarily would be inside one of our facilities are managed effectively to ensure that we're minimising any community outbreak.
So what's the time frame for someone sitting at home watching this? Are we talking about days? Are we talking about weeks?
It's certainly something that we're working as fast as we can on. We understand very much the human and emotional need for people in those circumstances for there to be a system that protects all New Zealanders around this. But by the same token, that we, as the people who have the clear accountabilities around this, need to be reassured that we have those systems in place. I don't think anyone needs reminding about the stakes that we're seeking to protect here. This is about protecting New Zealanders' health, protecting New Zealanders from further community outbreaks of COVID, and also protecting the gains that we've all made. While we have empathy for the individuals' circumstances and their human need, we also have a job to do to make sure we're protecting New Zealanders.
In terms of getting compliance to meet the exemption, would you be considering having an escort for those people 24/7 if they have to go and see, a dying relative, for for example?
Yeah, Audrey, I think there are two parts to that. One is how do we transfer them from where they are to that place in accordance with a system that we're satisfied with. And we are, my basis at this stage is we will own that system. We will not be relying on somebody to move that person under their own means. So I think that would give us an additional level of comfort. The compliance really is also in the follow-up in the days after, if that's the outcome. In other words, if somebody doesn't come back to a managed isolation facility, it's a longer term thing, then we need to use a range of measures, probably physical, some perhaps technical. We have a compliance team who are looking into those measures right now, and as the Minister mentioned, we understand the need to move quickly on it, but we've just got to get it right.
Thank you, Chair.
The review said that the system wasn't broken, but it says it's under extreme stress. There's no standardised approach to anything. There's literally pages and pages of things, quite big things that have gone wrong. That's about as close to broken as you can get, isn't it?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to bear in mind is that this is a system that has worked in terms of making sure that we're not seeing COVID leave the managed isolation facilities. Certainly what we saw were, I think, in the sort of 3-4 week period, we saw massive growth in the numbers of returnees, and as the rest of New Zealand moved down to level 1. The need to make some changes. So this is about moving beyond that immediate response phase to a more permanent solution around what we need to do. But I think we always have to bear in mind that this is one of the strictest, if not the strictest regimes in the world, that most other countries aren't even attempting to do this. And the fact that we are doing this is one of the reasons why New Zealand is in a unique position in terms of managing COVID in its country. So it's done what it needed to do. It's caught COVID at the border. We've seen those cases that have occurred within the facilities, but what we have not seen is community transmission from those cases.
The Jet Park Hotel has been held up as sort of the exemplar example in all of this. So why is it that one facility could get it so right and everyone else could get it so wrong?
So the Jet Park Hotel is a quarantine facility rather than a managed isolation facility. So they are quite separate. I think sometimes those terms, managed isolation and quarantine, it has both, but the bit that is held up as the gold standard is the quarantine facility.
It's not great at managed isolation.
It has only recently moved into managed isolation, and actually since we started undertaking the review, so I have no reason to think that it's not adhering to all the processes that are in place there. But the question you asked about why is the Jet Park getting it so right, it's only in recent days that it stood up its managed isolation component. It has largely been a quarantine facility, and there are different procedures that are in place with a quarantine facility. But Darryn, I don't know if you want to add to that.
The scaling up has been a significant part. When we first started, I think we mentioned there was 20 flights a week into New Zealand. Now that's 30 and it's growing quickly beyond 30. We were managing in the low 2000s total population inside those facilities. Now we have 4,692. So scaling up, and also of course we only had one region, Auckland. Now we're across 4 different regions. So there's something to be said for the complexity as we grow around New Zealand to make sure that everything is done as well as it needs to be. And the other part is, I think, would be the combining the three, what I would consider the 3 sort of key pillars of the managed isolation, being the amalgamation of the hotel work, the health teams on site, and the all of government teams on site. Those 3 teams working really, really closely together, building relationships, developing their procedures in a combined way, is what we're seeing to improve into the future. We're a continual learning team, of course. Anytime you start something, you're never going to get it right first time, but as the Minister said, the vast majority of outcomes have gone well. We are seeing a strengthening of some of those decision-making processes, which combine health decision-making and operations decision-making to get that single decision right, and that's really what we want to look at into the future.
Looking at those numbers going forward, I think you said you've got 6,500 beds coming on. How quickly have you already secured those, and how much more do you think you're going to have to surge to deal with the Kiwis coming home?
Yeah, I'll start perhaps and let the Minister talk to it today as well. We have a team who are absolutely sole focused on working through the requirements of our available capacity. We do have sufficient for a week and beyond. We're constantly working relationships and contracts with additional providers. The health criteria that are set, which stipulate what we need to achieve to be a facility, are a high standard. We're seeing that as a significant challenge, and I think the capacity question is one that we need to address as well into the future, because as we're seeing, it's a tightly run machine, and managing the inflow or the demand is a really key part of both the system working effectively, and perhaps the Minister might want to address that.
Sorry to interrupt. A week's planning doesn't seem
We're looking at 14 days. So we have a week capacity, and then we'll continue to evolve it to meet the 14-day requirement.
I think one of the critical things is that while we're also looking to increase supply in terms of bringing more onto the system, we're also rapidly and swiftly looking at what demand levers we may have as well, how we may be able to smooth that. So one of the meetings that we had this week was with Air New Zealand around getting someone from Air New Zealand's operational area into the all-of-government team here to work very closely with the operations team to understand the ins and outflows. So, I mean, while today we had 35 incoming passengers, today's a good day, there's 206 going out, but as we look ahead to tomorrow, there's 664 incoming and only 451 coming out. So working as closely as we can with the airlines around their loadings on planes, understanding what capacity for us looks like on the ground, and when things come on stream is going to be a really critical part of demand management. We're also thinking about what other policy levers might be there in terms of what systems we may be able to stand up so that someone, when they book a ticket, needs to ensure that there is a place for them to be arriving to. So we're actively pursuing all those areas.
People coming home?
Well, it's actually more working with the relationships with the airport, with the airlines. We all know that there is an absolute right of New Zealanders to come home, and I think we all want to think and know and cherish that if we're ever in a position of being away from home and something happens and we want to get back here, that we can. So we're needing to work through this, making sure that we're not stopping New Zealanders' ability to come home, but we're doing what we can to smooth demand. Of course, people's ability to come home is always dependent on there being an air ticket available, and that's the case whenever.
What can you give the public that we're not going to have a case again like the two women who were let out without testing?
So I think one of the things that we're really clear on in terms of our responsibilities and accountabilities in this, that it is absolutely our responsibility to make sure that we have a robust system in place that ensures nobody is leaving the facilities who pose a threat to New Zealanders' health or the gains that we have made. What we cannot give an absolute guarantee of is the behaviour of individuals. We've said all along that this system actually does require some trust. We're looking at what assurance processes that we have to put in place to make sure that people are adhering to the rules. But fundamentally, this comes back to what we said at the very beginning. This relies on those seeking to rejoin the team of 5 million to be willing to make a sacrifice of 2 weeks to abide by the rules. We all did it, and that got us to the position that we're in today.
Minister, how have you coped? Your review talks about, amidst the health services that you're providing, addiction services. How are you coping with returnees who are addicted to illegal substances?
So that's one of the things that we have. So over the course of the last 10 days, that we've been around 6 of the facilities, 5 of which were operational and 1 that was being stood up the next day to have a look at it before we went in. One of the conversations we did have with the team on the ground was around what support they needed to make sure that they had the right supports in place if there were issues with some of the people returning in terms of needing that support around addiction services. There is already support in the facilities around making sure that we're asking people to stay in place for 14 days. We need to make sure that we've got the right wellbeing measures in there as well, but we'll continue to look at that through our service level contracts with DHBs as well, because we think it's an important component.
Is there any reason to be concerned, or have you been worried that people have tried to deliver illegal substances to the isolation facilities?
Richard, I think it's fair to say this is a broad cross-section of New Zealand society. that we have in our managed isolation facilities. It's certainly something that we want to ensure that only what should be going in is going in, and that we will be putting in place systems to ensure that is the case.
Explain, Minister, with those numbers on the flights, why we can't be more clear about the number of people coming in, because surely, is it people just not hopping on planes after they've brought flights, or surely you would have the number of people who intend to fly back to New Zealand earlier?
So that's exactly why I could give you such detailed numbers, and I'll let you speak to this, but why I could give you such detailed numbers around what our expected incomings are. That's what we know at this stage, the number of people who are booked to come on those flights and using the loadings. But what we're seeing at the moment is not everybody is following through of all the steps. You'll always have fall off at every step of the way, but it's in a changed environment at the moment. But
I think you've answered your own question. I think people don't always follow through in their intentions. They may well book a ticket. Instances change, whether they're transiting through a third country to get to New Zealand. It doesn't always translate. We've been tracking the accuracy of our predictions into how it turns out into reality. It's not too bad. We're within plus or minus 7% of what we're thinking, but in some days that could still mean that we're seeing an additional 150 or 200 people arrive in New Zealand that you don't have surety on until literally they have boarded that aircraft overseas.
Can I just clarify, sorry, on Rich's question before? Can you just confirm, are you saying that there are things being brought in, like drugs, and if so, what other addictive things are coming in?
No, what I'm saying is we need to make sure we have systems in place, as we do in society. If there are illegal substances being taken into the facilities, then that's clearly breaking the law, and there'd be ability to deal with it in that way. But we have people, we have security on site. So, for example, one of the facilities that we visited has an Uber drop-off area, so that if returnees want a bit more variety in the menu that they're being served from the hotel, they can order in Uber Eats, not Uber going away, Uber Eats, just to clarify that. Just like you would expect in any managed isolation facility, everything that goes in is checked by either the security staff of the hotel, or we've also got AFSEC people on site at the hotels.
The question, do you have any evidence from the review, or what you've been told, even if anecdotally, that there has been instances where illicit things have been brought in?
There has been some suggestions that there is the potential for it, but I have not seen any hard evidence that that is the case.
Caught by security at any point?
Not that I've been informed that there's been an incident that has been recorded and reported to security.
What is your message to the 79 people who are still refusing to be tested?
Do your bit to rejoin the team of 5 million. We all made an extreme sacrifice to get to this position that we're in today. We're asking you to come home, be part of this incredibly privileged position that we're in terms of enjoying some of the most freedoms of anywhere in the world. All we're asking is that you play your part too.
You recommended at least considering the permanent deployment of police outside all managed isolation facilities. Do you have any thoughts to whether that should be done or will be done?
We're working closely with police in terms of getting the right posture. For us, we need to demonstrate that we have a really strong enforcement element to managed isolation. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to have permanent presence on site all the time. We've had that over different periods when we think there's a need. But I'm really confident that the relationships we have with police, I have police liaison officers in my staff headquarters, I'm in contact with senior police officers, that if we need to bring police onto sites, we can do so swiftly. We do have a strengthened police presence, however, at the quarantine facility. As we said, that's perhaps a slightly different posture, and our engagement with that when we visited the quarantine facility has certainly demonstrated they really bring that right presence.
What other cities, apart from the 4 currently being used, are you scoping out for managed isolation?
So we're presently focusing on those 4 regions. We have options to increase total capacity in those regions for the immediate future. Some would say, why don't you just branch out into the regions more broadly? But as I've said in the past, it's a really complex end-to-end system. So the more spokes you put onto that hub, the more you are likely to introduce interactions between level 4 and level 1 environments. And so ideally, we're trying to match carefully the DHB level support, the hotel level support, and the all of government level support. So actually, a greater number and a smaller number of regions is the preferred approach, and that's currently where we're at.
So just on the health side of things, the review found that in terms of the move was level 1 to the day 3 and 13, whatever it was, testing, that when Ashley Bloomfield announced that those doing the testing and the laboratories were completely unable to do that, does that speak to, I guess, a situation where the health sector felt like they couldn't raise with the Director General that they didn't have the capacity to do it, or that the Director General announced it without actually checking that there was a system to be able to do it?
Look, and I'm not going to hazard a guess of what led to that, but what I can tell you that is happening now, we've caught up on all day 3 testing within the facilities, and there is clear capacity for that day 3 and day 12 testing to be occurring. That will be reported to us daily, those numbers around it. So I think that what we certainly have seen in the report identifies that there were some growing pains because of the scale of which these facilities were growing, but what we have confidence in now is that we do have the ability to carry out those day 3 and day 12 tests, which are our expectation that we have that line of defence in addition to the public health measure of 14 days managed isolation, that we have that additional line of defence around it.
Does it worry you though that I guess that situation was created, and are you mindful of it as the number of people will continue to increase? I mean, you've set aside 300 million through till the end of the year, that you actually do checks on all parts of the system to make sure people aren't in situations where they're expected to carry out work that they actually just can't?
Well, I think one of the things that that Commodore Webb addressed was actually the communications through the system, both with returnees and with staff, and that's certainly something that we've been mindful on from the very beginning of when we were asked to undertake this role on, it seems like an age ago now, the Friday when we first did the press conference. We had a Zoom call with all of the operational leads to make sure that there's clear communication lines around what expectations are, and I know you have some further plans around that, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to communication last time and said that's key to any operation, and that's absolutely a true statement. We can always do better. We've had a desire to improve our own communications out there and have actively visited all of the regions, I should say. I think there's a need for myself and all the team to be ensuring we're talking to key leaders throughout the system, and those 3 pillars would include hotel management staff, our own people, of course, as well as connecting closely with health. We've talked about the airlines and the criticality of our engagement with both airports and airlines. So really, you can't do enough communicating, and we'll be really bolstering that to make sure that those nodes are all joined up.
You're not worried that there aren't particular areas where I guess there's an imbalance and people are fearful, I guess, to raise it, escalate it and say, actually, we don't have the ability to do that?
I've felt that people can talk really openly to us and tell us exactly what needs to be done, and that's what we're focusing on doing.
With your Labour campaign hat on, would you ever introduce a wealth tax?
Look, I'm here today to talk about what was happening in managed isolation and quarantine facilities, so I'm not going to get drawn into that, but that is certainly be something, the question you'd put probably to my boss or to the Minister of Finance.
The Green the wealth tax to pay for an increase in benefits and extended universal student allowance. Is that something Labour?
Look, all I can tell you is that I have had my head firmly buried in incoming and outgoing flows of people through our managed isolation and quarantine facilities. I haven't even had a chance to have a look at that announcement. Jessica.
Update on whether you'll look to charge people or partially charge people to come in?
Yeah, so we're continuing to do that policy work. I think, as I've indicated to you, that it's incredibly complicated, that we are working through what would constitute an impediment to the legal right of a New Zealander to return home in terms of the charging environment. It's a conversation that I'm continuing to have with colleagues, and we're continuing to work through, and we're continuing to work through the legal implications around that as well. I think, as I've always said, it is about striking that fairness. That the taxpayers of New Zealand are being asked to foot a very large bill. and what we do know is that for those exceptions that we're seeing coming through, I think there's a clear expectation of New Zealand that when essential workers are coming in, that the companies are picking up the tab around that rather than the taxpayers of New Zealand. There's also issues of people now that, as the rest of the world opens up, may choose to take flights elsewhere for a holiday, as it were, and come back, rather than those who are seeking to get home after they are trying to leave a country with COVID. So there's so many permutations of this. We're making good progress, but it is complex, and we're determined to get it right.
Do you see the case for maybe charging those who have been away from New Zealand for a significant period of time? So if you've moved overseas 5 years ago, you're not really part of a tax base anymore. Or the case put in some of the cabinet papers. Does that seem reasonable to you?
Yeah, and as I said, that's exactly what we're working through, about whether or not that constitutes a legal impediment to a New Zealander to return home. The fact that there is a government requirement to do managed isolation in order to enter the country, whether or not legally we can charge for that. And weighing through that, I mean, I take the view too that there is an impediment of any New Zealander returning home, and that they have to purchase an air ticket or a boat ticket. They have to purchase a ticket of some kind to get here, and that doesn't seem to be seen as an impediment to return home. But we're making sure we work our way through this systematically, and that we're doing it in a careful way, because we need to make sure we get this right. We're going to have this situation with us for some time to come.
Use something like the student loan system, so it's not a one-off cost.
There's a range of issues being looked at, and all things that have occurred to many people, and one that we're having to get legal to have a look at and seek legal opinion on.
You just said that this is going to be with us for some time. Mm-hmm. Now, Qantas last week said they would make no long-haul flights till July next year, or begin them again in July next year. How long are you planning for now? I mean, are you putting into place now a system that is sustainable for a year?
Look, I think when we look around the world and we see that COVID is growing, not slowing, that we're seeing record numbers of tests come through in places like the United States. We're certainly seeing more and more cases in our own managed isolation facilities as people return from hotspots where there is COVID. What we are absolutely determined to do is to put in place a system for as long as we need to protect New Zealanders and protect the gains that we have made. We have one of the most open and functioning economies in the world, and we want to keep it that way. This is expensive, but it is a critical part of our defence against having community spread of COVID in our country.
There's a difference between planning for in a response to an emergency and planning for a system that might be in place for 12 months. Have we moved to that planning?
Well, I think the fact that we signalled that we're putting in place a transition plan, and part of the work that I'm also carrying out under the work the Prime Minister's asked me to do is working on a transition plan of how it is that we move the system beyond its initial emergency response phase and to within MB. I think the fact that we are seeing the need to put in a transition plan that won't be completed to October gives you an indication that we do see that there is going to be a need for this. This is a critical part of our defence against COVID, the way in which we keep New Zealanders safe and the commitment we're willing to put into it.
On that cost, there was a man given an exemption the other day to join his family in isolation. He was already in New Zealand. Who picks up that tab? Is it still the government?
Look, I'd have to look at that particular case and see what it is. I'm happy to get back to you on it, but I'll have to have a look at the details of the case. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.